Dr. Zelixgar knew the day was off to a bad start when his dorsal frills began to itch an hour into his shift. On Lucara Station, he served as a veterinarian specializing in non-sapient fauna. But since the station was a hub for travelers from across the galaxy, he sometimes treated creatures whose intelligence straddled the line between pet and ally. He didn't mind the variety, he minded the danger. His biggest fear was dealing with apex predators. He had read too many horror stories of entire teams devoured by rampaging war beasts, or so the rumors claimed. He much preferred docile herbivores or small domestic animals that responded well to sedation. That morning, though, he felt an uneasy tingling in his frills. He suspected trouble was on its way. Despite that, he tried to go about business as usual, checking on a Gurmian lizard that had swallowed a plastic cylinder and giving a routine vaccination to a wide-eyed Kimbran fish dog. The clinic was quiet, the corridors echoing with distant chatter and the beep of medical scanners. Nothing seemed out of place, but Zelix kept glancing at the main entrance. He had no idea what was coming, only the uneasy certainty that it wasn't good. An hour later, he got his answer. The door to the clinic slid open with a whoosh, and a battered human staggered in. The man's clothes were torn and filthy, his arms smeared with dust and dried blood. Under one arm, he supported an enormous creature that nearly caused Zelix's hearts to skip several beats. It looked like a living mass of black fur, rippling muscles, and teeth the length of Zelix's fingertips. The thing's muzzle was crusted with gore, and though it panted weakly, each breath rattled with a deep, unsettling growl. There was a jagged tear along its flank, oozing blood. In that first second, Zelix nearly bolted for cover, certain that the beast would spring forward. But the human just let out a strained chuckle and said, "Easy, fella. We're almost there." He stared across the clinic, eyes landing on Zelix. "Doc, need some help here." Zelix swallowed hard. "Igriagalles." "Right." He signaled two assistants, but they froze in place, eyes wide with terror at the sight of that monstrous predator. Zelix felt a surge of dread. Every fiber of his being told him that dealing with this kind of creature was exactly what he'd trained to avoid. Yet, he also saw the creature's desperate state. Veterinarian ethics were clear. If a suffering animal was brought for treatment, you helped, no matter how terrifying. He forced himself to stride forward, laid him down on the exam platform. Carefully, the man nodded and guided the beast onto the metal surface. The creature whimpered in pain, a pitiful, almost childlike sound, which surprised Zelix. Maybe it was a sign that it wasn't about to rip his arms off. He inhaled, steadying himself. The man slumped to the ground, leaning against the exam table, exhaling with relief. One of Zelix's 4 hands fetched a scanner while the others prepped supplies. What is that?" Zelix asked, struggling to keep his voice steady. The man wiped sweat from his brow, revealing a nasty gash on his temple. "We call him Thrasher," he said. "He's a Kargan-class predator, if you want the official name. Found him on a pirate base a while back. He saved my hide more times than I can count." Zelix felt another surge of dread. Kargan-class predators were rumored to be genetic hybrids once used as living weapons. Their jaws could crush durasteel plating, and many stations banned them on sight. Still, here it was bleeding out in his clinic. Zelix slid the scanner over Thrasher's flank, noting elevated vitals, multiple lacerations, and at least one internal injury. How did this happen?" he asked. The man took a shaky breath. "Rock slide on Ralhound Ridge. We were climbing when the ground gave way. Thrasher pulled me free, then fought off some carrion scavengers. Now he's in worse shape than me." Zelix's frills twitched. "I see. We'll need sedation, sutures, maybe a transfusion if we can figure out his blood type. Do you have any documentation on him?" The man fumbled in his torn jacket and handed over a small data chip. Zelix inserted it into a side console. The readout was incomplete but offered a partial genetic profile, a war beast lineage, significant augmentation for muscle density, and a predisposition to aggressive territorial behavior. Zelix set his jaw, nodding to his assistants. "We'll do what we can, but I'll need you to help keep him calm. I can't risk sedation in this state without someone he trusts. The man laughed, then winced at the movement. "Doc, I'll do anything if it keeps him alive." Zelix carefully administered a mild analgesic, all the while expecting Thrasher to snap at him. Instead, the beast let out a low rumble, bearing a row of fangs but not attacking. The man reached up and gently stroked the side of Thrasher's massive head. "Relax, buddy. The doc's here to help." Zelix nearly dropped the injection gun, stunned at the gentleness of the gesture, and the way Thrasher closed his eyes as though soothed by it. In the next half hour, chaos seized the clinic. The sight of a Kargon predator drew staff from every corner, some with protective gear, others with sedation rifles. One security guard arrived, eyes bulging, insisting they had to quarantine the beast immediately. Zelix shouted that moving the creature could kill it. The guard demanded forms, disclaimers, hazard waivers. The man, Toby Evans, as Zelix eventually learned, clung to Thrasher's side, refusing to leave while Zelix worked. They managed to clean the worst of the wounds and seal a few gashes with advanced regrowth gel. Thrasher quivered under every prod, occasionally letting out a warning growl if an unfamiliar staff member got too close. Zelix forced himself to remain calm. He had 4 arms for a reason, and he used them all, scanning, applying gel, injecting antibiotics, monitoring vitals. Every so often, Toby would murmur, "Relax, he's harmless and spoiled," with a wry grin, as if a half-ton apex predator was just a big domestic pup. Eventually, the acute crisis passed. Thrasher stabilized, though his vitals remained concerning. Toby, on the other hand, had cracked ribs, a sprained ankle, and multiple abrasions. Zelix insisted on treating Toby in a separate bay, but Toby refused to leave Thrasher's side for more than a few minutes. Reluctantly, Zelix allowed a portable scanner brought into the same room. Security was not amused, especially once they discovered Toby hadn't registered Thrasher with station customs. Zelix found himself in an awkward position, juggling medical needs with bureaucratic demands. Every few minutes, a stern-faced customs official would show up in the corridor, grumbling about quarantines and permits. Meanwhile, Zelix's staff tried to reassure panicked clients who were worried a man-eater was loose in the clinic. It became an administrative circus, but Zelix found a strange determination stirring within him. Against his own nature, he wanted to see Thrasher survive. He had never directly treated a creature like this before. He'd studied them academically once. The textbooks labeled them Kargon war beasts, a genetically engineered species for mercenary use. Reports included words like unstoppable, highly aggressive, apex killer. But none of those texts described a wounded creature that whined softly when Toby left the room, or that let a trembling alien veterinarian patch its wounds. This contradiction fascinated Zelix even as it terrified him. His nurse, a young Sathrian named Elvie, peered in from the hallway, eyes huge. "Doctor," she whispered, "should I prepare the containment field?" Zelix thought about it, then nodded. "Yes, but we'll only activate it if things get out of hand. Right now, sedation might do more harm." Elvie nodded and slipped away. Toby gingerly lowered himself onto a stool, exhaling a weary breath. "Thank you," he muttered. "I know this must be an enormous risk for you." Zelix busied himself with rechecking Thrasher's bandages. "We have to. You said he saved your life. It's only fair we try to save his." He offered a small, tense smile, then glanced at Toby's injuries. "You, on the other hand, need rest and proper medical attention." Toby gave a half shrug with his good shoulder. "I've been through worse. He's the priority." Zelix felt a pang of respect. The notion of forging a bond with a creature so dangerous was almost incomprehensible, yet Toby radiated calm conviction. "Is he truly harmless?" Zelix asked. Toby hesitated. "He's not truly harmless. He's just loyal to me. I found him locked in a cage on a pirate outpost 2 years ago. He was starved, beaten, half mad. I freed him, thought he'd just run off, but he stuck around. Ever since, he's protected me. I won't pretend he's safe for everyone, but he's never attacked an innocent person, not once." That, Zelix mused, was more than he could say for some sentient species. He nodded slowly, then busied himself with securing the area. They set Thrasher up in a high-clearance ward, typically reserved for large or exotic animals that required special isolation. The glass walls and reinforced door provided a sense of security for everyone except Toby, who disliked being separated. But a line had to be drawn for the staff's morale and the station's legal guidelines. Toby compromised by letting them wheel him into an adjacent unit, where he could still speak to Thrasher through a comm channel if needed. In the hours that followed, Zelix found himself unexpectedly preoccupied with the beast's recovery. He visited the ward frequently, checking the monitors that showed Thrasher's heart rate and brain activity. The staff tried to avoid going in, except for the essential tasks of feeding and medication. At one point, Elvie attempted to administer an anti-inflammatory injection, but Thrasher bared his teeth, and she ran out. Toby, hobbling on a crutch, insisted on doing it himself. Zelix watched in astonishment as Toby calmly approached Thrasher, whispered something soothing, and pressed the injector to the beast's flank. Thrasher merely twitched. "Spoiled," Toby muttered afterward, half smiling. "He only trusts me." Zelix found himself relaxing by degrees, though it still alarmed him to be in such close proximity to those enormous jaws. But he also saw the intelligence in Thrasher's eyes. There was no random malice there, only pain, caution, and a flicker of recognition whenever Toby spoke. Rumors spread through the station that a lethal war beast was held in the veterinary clinic. Some claimed it had eaten 2 staff members. Others said it breathed acid. A few insisted it was psychic. Zelix rolled his eyes whenever he heard these tall tales. He quickly learned that no matter what you told people, they tended to imagine the worst. The station's security chief, an officious reptilian named Merzit, arrived with 2 heavily armed guards to assess the situation. He insisted on scanning Thrasher for contraband implants or hidden explosives. Toby bristled, but Zelix intervened, reminding them that the creature was stabilized and needed rest, not another stressful procedure. Merzit eventually relented, though he demanded Toby fill out a dozen forms verifying that Thrasher would remain in the clinic until further notice. The next challenge was station bureaucracy. A representative from the quarantine department insisted that any apex predator required a level 9 containment field and a security deposit large enough to buy a small spacecraft. Toby stared at the forms in disbelief, pointing out he couldn't possibly pay that. Zelix saw the hopelessness in Toby's face and, to his own surprise, intervened. He explained that Thrasher was in a critical medical state and, under interstellar law, had the right to receive life-saving treatment without prior registration. That only bought them time, but Zelix promised Toby that they would figure out a solution. Toby thanked him with genuine gratitude, and Zelix felt a swell of unexpected pride. Over the following days, Thrasher's condition improved. The deep wounds on his flank began to knit together, aided by advanced regrowth gel. He ate mostly nutrient paste, which Toby supplemented with scraps of cooked meat. The beast's appetite grew, as did the noise level when station staff realized they were down to half rations of meat supplies in the cafeteria. Meanwhile, Toby's ribs were set properly, and his ankle stabilized, though he moved slowly. Zelix noticed that Toby refused painkillers that might make him groggy. He wanted to be fully alert for Thrasher's sake. Zelix found himself asking Toby endless questions. How had Toby come to trust such a beast? What triggered Thrasher's aggression? How did Toby handle it? Toby answered with good humor, telling story after story of their adventures. Escaping a pirate ambush, surviving a desert planet's scorching dunes, saving a stranded family from a feral pack of lesser predators. Zelix realized that Toby and Thrasher had risked their lives for others on multiple occasions. The more he learned, the more his fear gave way to awe. But not everyone was so charmed. One afternoon, a new official showed up in the clinic hall, wearing a crisp uniform and an expression of permanent dissatisfaction. She introduced herself as Captain Larai of the Interstellar Wildlife Enforcement Division. Without preamble, she declared that Thrasher was an illegal specimen and must be confiscated. Toby's face went pale, and Zelix, who was in the middle of checking Thrasher's bandages, felt his stomach clench. "Confiscated for what purpose?" he asked, carefully stepping out of the enclosure. Larai sniffed. "He belongs in a secure facility or possibly euthanized, depending on the evaluation." Toby's hands balled into fists. "He's not property, and he's certainly not dangerous if you treat him right." Larai's scornful gaze swept over Toby. "All the same, Warbeast hybrids have no place in public areas. We can't allow it to remain." Zelix found himself stepping between them, protective instincts surging. "Captain, Thrasher is still recovering. He won't survive relocation in this state. Moreover, I can provide data that he's responding to control medical intervention." He paused, gathering courage. "I'm prepared to submit an official request for a behavioral assessment. If he passes, he should be free to stay with Toby under station oversight." Larai regarded him with an icy stare. "That's highly unorthodox." Toby spoke up. "I'll do whatever it takes. Forms, tests, fees, you name it. Just don't take him from me." For a long moment, Larai seemed ready to ignore them and force her way in. But perhaps something in Toby's desperation or the sincerity of Zelix's words stayed her hand. She nodded curtly. "Fine. We'll schedule an official behavior evaluation in 5 days. If it fails, the creature is gone." "Understood." Toby exhaled. "Understood." Zelix felt a mixture of relief and dread. In 5 days, Thrasher would face a test that could determine whether he lived or died. The next nights were restless for them all. Toby remained by Thrasher's enclosure, sleeping in a corner on a makeshift cot. Zelix found his mind racing with possibilities. How to prepare a war beast for a test that might provoke aggression, how to handle the station's rules, how to keep staff safe. He noticed that Thrasher's mood improved when Toby was near, and he ate more consistently. To help them bond further and reduce stress, Zelix allowed Toby to walk Thrasher through a back corridor for brief exercise sessions. A thick harness and muzzle were used, though Toby swore Thrasher hated the muzzle, and Zelix could see the animal drooping whenever it was locked on. But station guidelines required it. The first time they ventured out of the clinic, chaos erupted. A passing supply worker spotted the towering black-furred predator, screamed at the top of his lungs, and dropped 2 crates of electronics. Thrasher let out a startled grunt, but Toby quickly calmed him. Zelix apologized profusely, trying to assure everyone that they weren't in danger. Word spread, and soon curious onlookers hovered at a safe distance. Some took vids, no doubt uploading them to the station's local net. Zelix caught a glimpse of an article headline: "Maniac Vet Allows War Monster to Roam Clinic." It made his stomach twist. Over the next few days, Toby spent hours gently practicing simple commands with Thrasher in the hallway or in a small side room. Sit, stay, no bite. Thrasher's massive jaws could open wide enough to crush a grown man's torso, yet he gingerly accepted Toby's hand signals. Zelix watched from behind a transparent barrier, half transfixed, half terrified. Occasionally, Toby would grin and call, "See, Doc?" Harmless and spoiled. Zelix would roll his eyes. "He's 1 meter away from my worst nightmares," he'd mutter. But deep down, he felt a stirring of hope. Finally, the day of the behavioral assessment arrived. Larai came with a full team: 2 armed security officers, a quarantine specialist, and a station psychologist. They assembled in a large observation room that connected to a specialized simulation chamber. The walls of the chamber were lined with projectors capable of creating realistic holographic environments, complete with sounds and scents. Zelix had once used it to test how rescued animals responded to stimuli resembling their natural habitats. Now, it would be used to see if Thrasher posed a threat. Toby stood by the control console, shifting his weight nervously. Larai explained the process in a clipped tone. "We'll introduce increasingly stressful stimuli. If the beast shows unprovoked aggression or cannot be controlled, we'll have our answer." Zelix didn't like the sound of it, but he felt powerless to argue. Toby guided Thrasher into the chamber. The beast sniffed around, ears twitching at the unfamiliar hum of equipment. Toby gave him a gentle pat on the side and whispered, "Easy, boy. Remember, be good." Then Toby had to step out, leaving Thrasher alone under the watchful eyes of the cameras. Larry nodded to the psychologist, who keyed in the first sequence. A forest scene flickered into view, bright green with gentle birdsong. Thrasher walked through it, occasionally sniffing the air. The readouts showed mild curiosity, no signs of agitation. Next, they introduced holographic rodents scurrying around. Thrasher's gaze followed them, but he didn't pounce. He merely tilted his head. Zelix's heart pounded. So far, so good. Then came the next level, holographic drones that darted around, making bursts of static noise. That startled Thrasher. He let out a low rumble, hackles rising. Toby pressed close to the glass, eyes desperate, but he couldn't interfere. Thrasher stalked one drone, as though considering an attack, but after a moment, he let out a snort and turned away. Zelix could almost hear Toby's sigh of relief. "He's not attacking," Zelix murmured, scanning the readouts. "Stress levels are high, but he's restraining himself." Larry maintained a stony expression, giving the nod to proceed. Finally, the last test was introduced. A holographic humanoid figure, no weapons, but approaching Thrasher in a slow, uncertain manner. Thrasher's entire frame tensed. For a moment, the watchers felt certain he would lash out. Toby pounded a hand on the console, shouting, "Don't push him." But Larry ignored him. The figure drew closer, raising its arms slightly in a sign of openness. Thrasher let out a warning growl, lips curling back. Zelix's pulse raced. If Thrasher struck, that would be it. Toby scrambled for the microphone. "Thrasher," he called, voice echoing in the simulation chamber. Thrasher jerked his head at the sound, eyes darting back and forth. Toby tried again, voice firm but gentle. "Thrasher, come here." The giant beast let out a low whine, uncertain, then swung around and trotted toward the glass wall where Toby's voice had come from. He ignored the holographic figure altogether. Toby pressed a hand against the barrier. Thrasher stood there, tail low, letting out anxious rumbling noises but making no move to attack. After a tense few moments, Larry signaled for the simulation to end. The forest and hologram flickered off, leaving Thrasher in the blank metal chamber. Toby hurried inside, ignoring the calls for caution. Thrasher whined in relief and nuzzled against Toby's chest, nearly knocking him over. Zelix let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Larry watched, arms folded. For a moment, she said nothing. Then quietly she spoke. "It seems this creature exhibits a capacity for restraint, at least when the human is present." The psychologist noted signs of stress, but not uncontrollable aggression. A debate ensued. Eventually, they decided that Thrasher passed, conditionally. Larry made Toby sign a detailed agreement. Thrasher would remain under Toby's custody, but with mandated check-ins and a specialized muzzle rule in public. Toby beamed with relief. Thrasher stared at them all with large, dark eyes that seemed to say he just wanted a nap. Zelix helped Toby guide Thrasher back to the clinic. The hallway was abuzz with rumors. Apparently, half the station had tuned in to the security feed, expecting to watch a bloodbath. Instead, the war beast had shown surprising control. Some bystanders even applauded quietly as Toby walked past, leading Thrasher by a short leash. Others still shrank away or hissed warnings under their breath. But Toby didn't gloat. He just focused on supporting Thrasher, who was still limping slightly. At the clinic, Zelix double-checked the wound sites. It all looked healthy, scabs forming, signs of stable tissue regrowth. Thrasher grunted wearily and flopped onto a foam pad, ignoring the rest of the staff who hovered at a respectful distance. Toby sank into a chair, exhaling an enormous sigh. "Thanks, Doc," he said. "Couldn't have done this without you." Zelix felt a wave of embarrassment. "I did what any vet would do," he said quietly. "Though I'll admit, I almost fainted a few times." In the days that followed, Zelix began to notice subtle changes in how the station's population reacted to Thrasher. Some folks were still frightened, yes, but a few grew curious. They wanted to see the famed war beast who was apparently house-trained. One child even ran up to Toby, asking if she could touch Thrasher's fur. Toby hesitated, but Thrasher just sniffed the air and allowed a gentle pat. Zelix stood nearby, heart pounding. No harm came, and the child squealed with delight at how soft Thrasher's coat was. Word spread that maybe the monstrous creature wasn't quite so monstrous. That said, the clinic remained on edge. Dr. Zelixgar still found himself yelping whenever Thrasher yawned, revealing rows of fangs. Toby teased him about it, but in truth, Zelix was slowly adapting. Each day, he overcame a little more of that primal fear. One evening, when the station's corridors were quieter, Toby and Thrasher took a short walk through a greenhouse dome. Zelix accompanied them, partly out of curiosity, partly out of a desire to confirm the animals' continued improvement. Giant leaves rustled above them, and small glowing insects flitted by. Toby murmured about how back on Earth, he'd grown up with big dogs, but none quite like Thrasher. Zelix commented that where he came from, even domestic animals rarely weighed more than 30 kilograms. Thrasher weighed closer to 200. They paused near a reflecting pool. Thrasher sniffed at the water, lapped a bit, then sneezed. Toby rubbed his nose. Yeah, buddy, probably not the best smell, huh? Zelix found himself laughing softly at the endearing scene. A month ago, he would have been shaking in terror at being this close. Now, he felt a guarded sense of kinship. By the second week, Toby was well enough to consider leaving the station. But he discovered that the bureaucratic mess of traveling with a recognized apex predator was formidable. Customs insisted on specialized tags, a high-risk fauna permit, and a deposit Toby still couldn't afford. Worse, many shipping lines simply refused to transport a creature with Thrasher's classification. Toby sank into a chair in Zelix's office, burying his face in his hands. We'll never get out of here, will we? Zelix cleared his throat. I've been compiling evidence, videos, medical logs, the successful behavioral assessment. Possibly, I can convince the station council to waive certain fees. As for transport, maybe we can find a smaller cargo vessel that's open to unique passengers. Toby perked up slightly. You do that? Zelix shrugged, antennae flicking. This ordeal has become oddly personal. Besides, I'd like to see him fully recovered, and that might require more advanced therapy than we can do here. Toby grinned. Doc, you're a lifesaver. Over the next few days, Toby and Zelix compiled a massive file of medical records and character references. They included testimonies from staff who had interacted with Thrasher, some still trembling but admitting that the beast obeyed Toby's commands. They wrote about how he had responded calmly in the simulation chamber. Zelix even got a local official to sign a statement verifying that Thrasher had not caused any injuries during his time on the station. It was hardly the typical adoption application, but it was all they had. Then, Toby lugged it to the station council's administrative office, a drab waiting room on level 13 that smelled like stale coffee and artificial pine. They made Toby wait 3 hours before calling his name. He stepped inside, leaving Zelix pacing the corridor. After an eternity, Toby emerged, expression uncertain. They said they'll review it, he muttered. No guarantees, though. It took 5 more days, during which Thrasher continued to heal and resume a semblance of normal activity. Eventually, Toby received a summons to meet with Counselor Sarum, who oversaw off-world transport regulations. Zelix went along for moral support. Sarum was a thin-limbed biped with translucent skin, wearing elaborate golden pins to indicate rank. His attitude seemed polite but wary as he tapped through the digital file. You understand that the station can't risk public safety just because you feel attached to this creature, he said. Toby nodded. I get that. But he's not just a creature to me, he's family. And I'll pay any penalty or bond one can manage. Sarum regarded him with an unreadable expression. The fines we normally impose for harboring an unregistered apex predator are quite high. Zelix interjected. He didn't exactly bring Thrasher here for leisure. It was a medical emergency. Should compassion factor in? Sarum paused, pursing his lips. Compassion is not the first word that comes to mind when dealing with a war beast, he said. But your data is compelling. After a tense silence, Sarum informed them that, pending final approval by the Interstellar Veterinary Guild, Toby and Thrasher would be granted an emergency relocation permit. Toby almost collapsed with relief. Zelix's heart soared. The condition was that Toby must comply with specialized transport guidelines, including sedation for Thrasher during slip-space transitions, and they had to present weekly checkups at any station they visited. Toby agreed to everything, no matter how tedious. As I left the office, Toby could barely keep from smiling. "We're free," he whispered. Zelix, exhausted but relieved, nodded. In a manner of speaking, yes. That evening, Toby hosted a small gathering in the clinic's lounge to thank Zelix and the staff. Thrasher dozed in a corner, occasionally opening one eye to see who was around. Even Elvie, who used to tremble at the sight of him, ventured near enough to place a small bowl of water beside him. "Hi, Thrasher," she murmured. "Please don't bite me, okay?" Thrasher merely blinked, then shifted to a more comfortable position. Toby recounted their journey, how he found Thrasher in that pirate outpost, half dead, and nursed him to health with stolen ration packs. Zelix realized how precarious Toby's own situation had been. Toby lived on the fringe, taking odd jobs, drifting from one star system to another with Thrasher as his loyal protector. The clinic staff listened, enraptured by the improbable friendship. When Toby asked Zelix if he would keep in contact to monitor Thrasher's recovery, Zelix quickly agreed. "I want to see how he progresses," Zelix said. "Though I still can't believe I'm saying this about a war beast." Toby laughed. "Welcome to my life. Once you get past the teeth and the muscle, he's a big softy." Zelix merely shook his head. "I still get palpitations every time he yawns." Toby patted Zelix's shoulder. "You've done more for us than anyone else ever would." "Thank you, Doc." On the day of departure, Toby took Thrasher for one last checkup. The stitches were out, the regrowth gel had done its job, and the fur around his flank was almost fully regrown. He was left with a patchwork of scars, but he seemed energetic. Zelix patted the beast's shoulder, summoning enough courage to make contact. Thrasher sniffed Zelix's hand and gave a quick, warm huff. Zelix let out a shaky exhale. "I can't believe I'm about to say goodbye to you." Toby smiled. "We'll visit. We have to come back for follow-ups, after all." Zelix gave a small nod, the corners of his mouth curling into what his species considered a grin. "Make sure you do." They walked through the corridors toward Docking Bay 7, where an old cargo ship was waiting. Other passengers gave them a wide berth, though a few recognized Thrasher from the station bulletins and offered curious waves. Toby stopped at the security gate, fishing out the brand-new, high-risk fauna. Permit from his satchel. The board officer on duty waved a scanner over Thrasher's microchip. It beeped, verifying that he was cleared for travel with Toby Evans. The officer gave them a dubious look, but stepped aside. Toby exhaled in relief, leading Thrasher up the ramp. Zelix hovered at the threshold, feeling an unexpected pang in his chest. Toby turned back for a moment. "You sure you won't come along, Doc? I'd pay for your seat if I had any money left." Zelix chuckled. "I have patients here and staff to manage. But maybe one day I'll join you for an off-world consult." Toby's grin widened. "Careful, or I'll hold you to it." Thrasher stared at Zelix with those dark, intelligent eyes. Then, in a gesture that was almost comedic given his size, he nudged Zelix gently with his broad snout, as though to say farewell. Zelix felt a lump in his throat. "Safe travels, you too," he managed. "And keep him from eating anyone." Toby rolled his eyes. "Relax, Doc. He's harmless and spoiled." Then, with a playful salute, Toby and Thrasher disappeared into the ship. The cargo door sealed shut, and the engines rumbled. Zelix stepped back, watching as the vessel lifted off. He stayed there until it vanished into the station's outer docking corridor, heading for the slip-space gate beyond. In the quiet that followed, Zelix realized how empty the corridor felt without the looming presence of that giant predator. He let out a long breath, reflecting on everything that had happened. Thrasher had arrived as the living embodiment of Zelix's worst nightmares. Yet somehow, the clinic staff had saved him, and in so doing, Zelix felt his own perspective shift. He remembered how terrified he'd been at the beginning, certain that something so dangerous could never truly be safe. But Toby had proved that trust and loyalty could blossom in the unlikeliest of forms. That final nudge from Thrasher was proof enough that the beast recognized Zelix's care, too. At last, Zelix headed back to his office. He found Elvie tidying up the aftermath of the gathering. She looked at him curiously. "Are you okay, Doctor?" Zelix nodded slowly, letting his frills settle flat. "I think so. I've never felt so relieved and yet strangely sad." Elvie offered a small smile. "We'll miss them, won't we?" Zelix sighed, recalling Thrasher's monstrous jaws and Toby's unwavering devotion. "Yes," he admitted. "Oddly enough, I think we will." Elvie gently patted his upper arm. "Well, we can add to your professional record. You treated a Kargon war beast and lived to tell the tale." Zelix snorted softly. "I did. And the next time someone brings in something truly terrifying, I might not faint immediately." Elvie laughed. "I'll hold you to that." In the days that followed, the clinic resumed normal operations. Clients came in with minor ailments: an insectoid pet with a cracked exoskeleton, a flightless avian that had ingested plastic shards. Still, every so often, someone asked about the giant predator, wanting to hear the story. Zelix told a condensed version, but always omitted some details, like how he initially wanted to run away. He focused on how Toby's bond with Thrasher reminded him that an animal's nature didn't always dictate its fate. Over time, the sensational rumors around the station died down, replaced by new gossip about smugglers, cosmic storms, or political strife in distant systems. Yet whenever Zelix passed by the place where Toby had walked Thrasher, he remembered the pounding of his hearts and the ultimate triumph of compassion over fear. About a month later, Zelix received a data packet from an off-station relay. It contained photos and short recordings from Toby. There was a clip of Thrasher prowling around a small outpost on a desert planet. Wearing a wide-brimmed hat, Toby had somehow balanced on his massive head. Another photo showed Toby sitting cross-legged in the shadow of Thrasher's flank, giving a thumbs up to the camera. The attached note read, "Doc, we're making progress on therapy. No biting incidents. Locals still freak out, but we'll manage. Thought you'd like to see he's doing fine. Thanks for everything, T." Zelix stared at the images, a warm sensation blooming in his chest. He saved them in a private file labeled Success Stories. Late that evening, Zelix lingered after hours in the clinic's quiet main hall. The overhead lights dimmed to a soft glow, and a hush lay over the rows of empty enclosures. He walked to the glass isolation ward where Thrasher had once lain, tubes and bandages covering his massive body. Zelix remembered the initial terror, the rattling snarls, and Toby's unwavering dedication. He recalled the day they walked Thrasher down the corridor, the child who reached out to pet him, the adrenaline that coursed through Zelix at every turn. Now, the enclosure was empty, silent, as if it were any other part of the clinic. But to Zelix, it would always stand for a moment of profound change, where he discovered that sometimes the scariest creatures were the ones most in need of kindness. A faint smile curved across his lips. He imagined Toby's casual drawl. "Relax, he's harmless and spoiled." After all he had seen, Zelix no longer doubted it. Maybe one day, Zelix thought, Toby and Thrasher would return. And if they did, Zelix would welcome them without hesitation, armed with new knowledge and a braver heart. Until then, he would keep their story close, a testament to the power of trust, even in the teeth of the galaxy's fiercest beasts. He shut off the last light in the clinic and headed home, the echoes of that extraordinary encounter lingering in his mind. If some future visitor brought in another fearsome monster, maybe Zelix would still tremble a bit, but he'd remember Thrasher's giant head resting contentedly in Toby's lap and the final gentle nudge he'd given Zelix. Yes, he'd remember that and gather his courage, stepping forward to help. Because after all, he was a vet, and compassion was part of the job description, no matter how many rows of teeth stared him down. He walked through the station corridors, passing the once hostile glances of random strangers. Now, people greeted him with respectful nods. Word had gotten out that he was the vet who handled the dreaded war beast and succeeded. Some even murmured, "Thank you for your service, Doctor," as he went by. He felt his frills flush with embarrassment. Inside, he was still the same Zelixgar who hated the idea of an apex predator snapping at him. But maybe it was good for everyone to think he'd grown bolder. He hoped it might inspire trust in the idea that such creatures could be cared for and understood. Toby's parting words echoed in Zelix's mind. He's harmless and spoiled. And maybe, in the end, that statement was true, not because of some inherent docility, but because of Toby's unwavering belief that there was more to Thrasher than violence. With that thought, Zelix returned to his quarters, letting the station's hum lull him to sleep, confident that tomorrow would bring new challenges, new creatures, and maybe, in time, a reunion with the extraordinary pair who had changed his life forever.